Hello everybody, welcome to A British Audiophile. If you're new to this channel and you haven't met me before, my name is Taryn. I'm assuming most of you watching this video will be aware that Denafrips makes DACs. I mean, come on, you either have to be new to the YouTube hi-fi community or living under a rock not to have come across one of those reviews. And I think it's fair to say, as far as I'm aware at least, that those reviews have been wholeheartedly positive. People have loved them. I'm not one to pay too much attention to hype. There have been a few products that I've come across that have been raved about, that have been, how can I put this, brought back down to earth. But not these Denafrips DACs. They're the real deal. The Denafrips Aries 2 would be without doubt or any hesitation my recommendation for the DAC to buy at the right side of £1,000. As for the Pontus II, well, at £1,800, that's the DAC that I'd choose to install in my own system, listening to my preamp speakers through my exposure amplifiers. It may have lost out to the Thallo Audio Spring 3 as my DAC of the year in 2021, but that's down to functionality. The Spring 3 Level 2 comes with a remote control and the option of an excellent all-analog fully balanced preamp. I still have the Pontus II here, so I was in the fortunate position to be able to evaluate a full Denafrips electronic system. I have to say from the onset, stack them on top of each other, and they simply look fantastic. But it's the Denafrips Hades preamp and its matching Thallo power amp that I'm reviewing here today. So is this a case of Denafrips knocking the ball out of the park yet again with their amplification as they have done with their DACs, or would they be better off sticking to what they know best? Let's find out. The Denafrips Hades preamp retails for 1,849 Singaporean dollars, sold directly by global distributor Vinshine Audio. That translates to about £1,000 plus shipping and taxes. The superbly constructed and finished brushed silver all aluminium chassis measures 60 by 320 by 380 millimeters, or 2.3 by 12.6 by 15 inches. It's reassuringly heavy at 9 kilograms or 20 pounds. The matching Thallo power amplifier is identical in width, but stands 140 millimeters high and is a little deeper at 400 millimeters. It weighs 19 kilograms. Those imperial measurements for my American friends are 5.5 by 15.75 inches and 42 pounds. The Thallo will set you back 2,894 Singaporean dollars, which is a pre-tax and shipping price of approximately £1,600. Controls are limited. This is an audiophile purist's dream. A quick press of the knob on the left will take the Hades out of standby. The same knob can be used to toggle between the three inputs. The knob on the right has a satisfying click to it as you move through the switched relay volume control. There's just one button on the Thallo power amp that turns from red to flashing blue as the power supply charges up, and then permanently blue once it's done. I wouldn't want to drop the supplied all-metal remote control, as you're more likely to damage your floor than the remote itself. The array of buttons suggests that there are more Denafrips devices on their way, including, perhaps, an updated Avatar CD player, which isn't currently listed on the Vinshine Audio website, but I'm merely speculating. To the rear, you'll observe that the Hades preamp has 3 analog inputs, the preferred being 2 fully balanced XLR, as this is a fully balanced preamp, almost unheard of at this price in audiophile land. There is one RCA input as well, along with one RCA output, but it's the XLR balanced output you will need to connect to the fully balanced Thallo power amplifier. Let's take a look inside the Hades preamplifier. For a change, I need to remove 2 screws to get the top plate off. I'm going to leave it to one side because it's heavy. Nicely engraved Denafrips logo there. I think you can immediately appreciate how well laid out the circuit board is. This is the AC inlet coming in. That IC there is the main power supply module, AC to DC. And there is a small heatsink here, which normally would be used to cover some transistor, but I can't see underneath it. This section here is the power supply. with a large O-ring transformer, large for this kind of device. That helps to lower impedance, and O-rings are better than toroids because they radiate even less noise. It's rated at 80 VA. Lots of power supply filter capacitance. Generally the more you have the better, because it helps to provide a stable voltage. They're from top quality American manufacturer Elna. And you have 6 more caps here. These are metallized caps from Weimer. So they probably are in the signal path. I should imagine they're decoupling capacitors because you want the signal going from one stage to another, not the incoming DC. That's what they probably are doing. And then you have an active preamp, not a passive preamp. Doesn't have gain, but it is active. These blue rectangular devices are the relays for the volume control and their associated high precision resistors. It's a much more elaborate way of doing a volume control than the traditional pot. The benefit is it has much better matching from left to right channel, better linearity across the frequency range and the volume range. And you can see the rest of the circuit there. It's a fully balanced circuit. Normally what you'll have is XLR coming in on some preamps, but then it's single-ended throughout, because to have a fully balanced circuit you need twice as many components, and twice as many components means double the cost. The reason they have it fully balanced is to keep the noise as low as possible, because you have obviously the positive and the negative signal wires rather than just the positive, and that means that you can do something called common mode rejection, which means isolate the noise and get rid of it. So just zoom back out so you can see the whole circuit before I switch to the Thallo power amp. I've already removed the top plate from the Thallo power amplifier. In order to get it off, I had to remove some of the screws from the heatsink, so I thought I might as well go a little bit further to show you the power amp modules without getting into desoldering and resoldering wires. Let's start with the power supply. A large 600 VA rated toroid transformer, not an O-ring. An O-ring would just add unnecessary expense. Power amplifiers tend to be quite noisy, so an O-ring wouldn't be deemed necessary. I don't think I've ever seen one on a power amplifier. Lots of filter capacitance for the power supply, again from Elna, and they've gone for lots of smaller caps rather than 4 large ones, for example. The idea being that smaller caps are easier to charge up, they charge up more quickly and can deliver transients more quickly as a consequence. This amplifier is capable of delivering 120 watts into 8 ohms, 220 watts into 4 ohms. And here you have one of the power amp modules mounted directly to that heatsink, which you can't see. I don't think you can see it in that gap. No, you can't. Are 4 pairs of BJT bipolar junction transistors, and that's twice what you get on the Hyperion model below. It's a fully balanced power amp with 26 dB of gain. So they haven't bumped the gain up on the power amp because the preamp has unity gain. 26 dB is about normal, so technically this should pair up reasonably well with other preamps. There's an identical power amp module on the other side. The Denafrips Hades and Thallo combination is an interesting sounding amplifier. Now, I'm not saying that to be negative, but it did literally have me scratching my head at times. Okay, perhaps I was being a little bit slow, but I think its strengths are immediately obvious, whereas its shortcomings a little less so. Eventually I figured things out. It has staggering levels of clarity, grip and control. When I mean staggering, I mean better than anything that I reviewed this far. Better than my own Exposure 21 Pre and 18 Super monoblocks. I can't help but think that this comes down to design to some extent. When fed with the Pontus II DAC, you have a fully balanced system throughout. Fully balanced DAC connected to a fully balanced preamp connected to a fully balanced power amp, with XLR connections throughout and the benefit of common mode rejection and the noise reduction properties that that brings. It manifests itself in your ability to hear fine details and in how separate one instrument sounds from another. There's no bleed through whatsoever. The bass is, Okay, it's as tight as a drum. That lower bass region where you hear rumbles, that's as well defined as anything that I've ever heard. But, and you knew there was a but coming, somewhere in that mid-bass region there's a lack of bass weight. It's not obvious with snares and toms, and that's why you won't pick it up with every track, but it is obvious with kick drums. That's that 50 to 60 Hertz region. That's also where a lot of tracks get their rhythmic drive from, and it means that the presentation comes off a little bit dynamically challenged. You wind up listening to what's in the recording rather than being pulled into the performance. The mid-range, well, there's the clarity. Oh my God, you hear everything. The beginning, the middle, the end of every note, and separate it out like I spoke about earlier. There's a little bit of warmth there in the lower mid-range as well. This isn't a cold sounding amplifier, but with certain instruments and certain vocals, those of you who are regular viewers of this channel will know that I like my blues singers, people like Muddy Waters, John Lee Hooker, B.B. King. They have very deep, powerful voices, and they're not rendered with full authority. The soundstage is a little bit diminished though, extends beyond the speakers a little bit left and right, and has a reasonable degree of soundstage depth, but it isn't as deep or as wide as certain other amplifiers I've heard around this price. Imaging is spot on though. The landscape that's laid in front of you is very well defined, even if it is on a slightly smaller canvas. But you can marvel in the high frequency performance, which is beautifully extended and refined, no hint of over-sibilant behaviour at all. In comparison, the Hagel H190, which in most markets is likely to cost you a similar price to the Hades-Thallo combination, has nowhere near the clarity and even falls behind it when it comes to grip and control. What the Hagel has is a greater sense of scale and dynamics over the Denafrips stack, and also a more consistent and neutral tonality. My Exposure 21 Pre and 18 Super monoblocks also lose out to the Denafrips Hades and Thallo stack when it comes to clarity and control, even if it is by a much smaller margin. But there's a much greater sense of scale, dynamics and tonal richness, which means that the music that you play through it has a far superior sense of dimensionality. I did wonder whether this sense of scaling things down was primarily due to decisions made in the design of the Hades preamplifier, which has unity gain. Normally you'd expect to see 10 or 12 dB gain on a preamplifier. One of the things that's known to do is improve bass weight and the impact that that potentially can have on scale and dynamics. So I swapped things around a little bit. I hooked up the Hades preamplifier to my Exposure 18 Super monoblocks. I couldn't do things the other way around. I couldn't hook up my Exposure 21 preamplifier to the Thallo power amplifier because the Thallo power amplifier is a balanced power amplifier and I'd need a balanced preamplifier, which the Exposure isn't. But it did shed some light on the situation. What I found was there was a little bit of reduction in scale and dynamics when I connected the Hades to my Exposure power amps, but not to the same extent as when I connected the Thallo. That meant that the Thallo was partially responsible for reducing scale and dynamics, but so was the Hades preamplifier. Make of that what you will. One of the things you have to get used to with the Hades preamplifier is turning the volume dial up more than you'd ordinarily expect to. And that's because you don't get the volume boost that you get with most preamplifiers due to unity gain. It's not a problem, just requires a little bit of mental adjustment. The stepped relay volume control adds no distortion. It has 60 steps. It just means that you wind up listening quite often in the 40s and the 50s range. It drove my 85 dB sensitivity Proax in this room, which is a fairly decent size, as loud as I could wish for. But those of you running inefficient speakers in larger rooms, you may run out of headroom. And if you're thinking, well, I'll just switch to a preamp that has a little bit of gain for the added volume, just check with Denafrips first and make sure it can handle the extra voltage that you're pushing in. Otherwise, you're in danger of running it into clipping at the input of the power amp. Just before I move on, I want to ask people not to take my comments out of context. Matching preamplifiers with power amplifiers across different brands is almost always problematic. There's the impedance matching, the gain matching, as well as matching the sonic characteristics themselves. That's why I generally advise people to stick with the same brand of preamplifier and power amplifier unless you know exactly what you're doing. I see it as my job to highlight the differences in sonic characteristics as well as operationally. This is Denafrips at the end that we're talking about. It's not like you can just go down to your local dealer and have an audition. That's why I've gone into quite a bit more detail. I did my due diligence. Most of these comments relate to me listening to my Proax, which were the primary listening speaker, but I tried some others as well. The Triangle 40th Anniversary Comet is a warm, engaging speaker with good levels of clarity for around £1,500. It made for a balanced presentation with the Hades Thallo combination. The Amphion Argon ones at around £1,200 are an extremely resolving and quite punchy little speaker. All that superb clarity and control that the Denafrips stack had was all too evident in this pairing. The Denafrips Hades preamplifier and Thallo power amplifier have the exceptional build quality that you come to expect from this brand. The levels of detail retrieval and control of low frequencies are quite frankly stunning, the best I've heard in any amplifier I've reviewed so far, but there's also a limited sense of scale and dynamics. I asked a pretty unfair question at the beginning of this review. Have Denafrips knocked the ball out of the park yet again with these amplifiers, or should they stick to what they know best? And the honest answer is, well, neither. It's true. The Hades preamplifier and the Thallo power amplifier don't quite achieve the levels of sonic performance that I experienced from the Denafrips DACs, but they sound absolutely fantastic in certain areas. Just so happens that they've got a couple of shortcomings as well. I don't think it's going to take an awful lot to turn what's a good product into an exceptional product. A little bit of tweaking in the circuit here, a little bit of change in the voicing there. It'd be interesting to see how these amplifiers evolve down the line. As they stand today, you can still build a fairly nice system around these amplifiers, just have to choose the appropriate speakers. The Denafrips Hades preamplifier and Thallo power amplifier get a recommended from this channel. My question for today is, what's your experience of mixing and matching components? I want to know about the good, the bad, and the downright ugly when it comes to putting together a system. I think it'd be fun, not only just for me to read, but for other viewers as well to know what works and what doesn't work. And if you don't have too much experience mixing and matching components, let me know what combinations you think might be interesting. That'd be fun to read as well. All that remains for me to say is, if you like this video, you like what I'm doing with this channel, and you like to see it grow, please do all that social media stuff. Hit the like button, share it, subscribe, and hit the bell notification so you know when new videos arrive. Check me out on Patreon for consultancy services, bonus content, and the video chats that we have. But for today, for now, a British audiophile, signing off.